Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana.
With your host, Lee Barton, and co-host, Florence Myers.
We want to welcome you to the National Federation of the Blind Newsline show. This is a show that many of you have been listening across the state of Indiana. And you know, we bring awareness for the community, education, encouragement, and information, providing a pathway to individuals listening and viewing audience. So today we do have a very special guest. And as you know, I am your host, Lee Martin, and our fabulous co-host, Miss Florence Myers. Florence, how are you today?
I am doing well today. Thank you for asking. As many of you know, I am co-host Florence Myers, and we have a very interesting guest for you today by the name of Mr. John Pare, who is the National Federation of the Blind Executive Director of Advocacy and Policy. And Mr. Pare, thank you so very much for being our special guest today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I use Newsline every day, so it's so appropriate for me to be here to talk about Newsline, or it's just something I'm always, I welcome the opportunity to talk about NFB Newsline.
As many of you know, NFB Newsline is a free audio information service for the blind print challenge community, which gives us access to newspapers, magazines, TV guide listings, sales circulars, and a plethora of information right at our fingertips. We can access that service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I have my favorites. I love to read the magazines. Lee, I know that you're an avid reader of NFB Newsline.
Most definitely. And I'll tell you, the subscribers that we have throughout the state of Indiana have the luxury of accessing 18 publications throughout the state of Indiana. And I must say that through our state sponsor, the Talking Book and Braille Library, a lot of our subscribers are really enjoying the service of the National Federation of the Blind NFB Newsline. Now, today, as we're speaking with Mr. John Pare, we're going to be talking a little bit about Social Security. And so some of the related publications related to today's show are the ARP Bulletin and Magazine on NFB Newsline, as well as the Braille Monitor. There's a magazine called Health, which I really enjoy. The Journal of Blindness and Research, the National Federation of the Blind Presidential Release. And we also, for children, because the National Federation of the Blind has something for everyone, students, youth, adults, seniors, and veterans. And today we're going to talk I'm going to share with you a little bit about Kids Reading Corner, some of the publications that are in there. Animal Tales is one that has recently been added to the Kids Reading Corner.
That actually was added in February of this year, Lee.
Okay, and I tell you, it's really interesting. I was in there reading and I felt like a kid myself. Girls' Life, great information there. Mm-hmm. There's Highlights. J14, very interesting publication right
and
there.
Now that actually, they used to be just for teens, so they kind of shortened that name. I love how they did that.
Yes,
and that's also a new one that was just added February 2022.
Yes, and I think the name is very appealing for J14s.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's National Geographic, and we also have Stone Soup. Stone Soup has been there for a while. And I tell you, if you would just have your kids take the time to check out the Kids Corner on NFB Newsline, I'm sure that you'll find a safe place for them. Now, you can send your comments to the NFB Newsline Indiana, and you can follow along with our commercials that we made here for the state of Indiana and the service of the NFB Newsline. So follow those, and the information will be right there. And we'll be right back with our guest, Mr. John Pare, all the way from our national office in Baltimore, to share with us about Social Security. Stay tuned.
I just graduated college as a blind student. How can I independently find job listings?
Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
It is a fantastic service.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine.
Dad, you read Jerusalem Post too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Welcome back to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana. And our guest today, Mr. John Pare. Mr. Pare, tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Well, it's so interesting that I'd be on this show, because NFB Newsline is how I found the National Federation of the Blind. So these two topics are intertwined. I started losing my vision about 25 years ago when I was in my 30s, and I lost my job. I lived in Virginia at the time. I didn't know any blind people. I didn't know that blind people could do the things that we do. And so I moved to Tampa, Florida, and went on Social Security disability. And I started listening to NFB Newsline and just loved it. I really like keeping up on the news, keeping connected with society. I listened to the business section. And day after day, I would hear that this was a service of the National Federation of the Blind. And so one day I finally looked up the National Federation of the Blind and found out about the fact that there were chapter meetings all over the country. And there was a chapter meeting coming up that weekend about a mile from where I lived. So I went to the chapter meeting, and after all these years, I met other blind people. And I realized that they weren't just sitting at home doing nothing. They had jobs, and they were had families, and they were active and engaged. And I said, I want to be more like you guys. And I realized I had made a really big mistake for the years and leaving my job, that I could work, and that I had to have high expectations for myself. And the NFB had high expectations for me, and it rubbed off. I started meeting people and getting very involved at the time at the NFB of Florida. And to make kind of a long story short, the NFB Newsline helped head me eventually to where I got an interview at the National Center in Baltimore, and interviewed and was offered a job. And in fact, my first job was to work on NFB Newsline, which I was just thrilled to do, because Newsline had really changed my life for the better, and the National Federation of the Blind had changed my life for the better. So I thank everyone who's involved with the NFB for what you helped do for me.
Well, I tell you, John, it's so now you elevated yourself to the executive director of Advocacy and Policy. And that's a great accomplishment. You know, I first met you when the National Federation of the Blind of Indiana was going through a transition with the then coordinator, Mr. Joe Money. And I met you at the State House here in Indiana, and you and I had a good conversation. And I tell you, it was an inspiration with the encouragement that you gave me, because we had some like issues as far as losing your job because you lost your sight. And I just want to take this moment and publicly say to you, thank you for encouraging me to do what I am able to do with the National Federation of the Blind Newsline. So
I want to thank you. But I also want to thank you that because you shined. I went there and I thought, oh the folks here, especially Lee, and your story and what you have done, it inspired me, and it really helped get Newsline. It was really that beginning with your testimony and your involvement, and then you bringing in other people within the National Federation of the Blind that helped get Newsline in Indiana. Now that's like 15 years ago, isn't it? It's quite some time ago.
It's quite some time ago. And I tell you guys had me doing things that I'd never done, just like I had never been blind. I've never spoken in front of the General Assembly and the appropriation committees and with our state legislators. And I tell you, it has really been a growth for me, and hopefully a growth for our community with the National Federation of the Blind and with the service of the National Federation of the Blind NFB Newsline. I want to let our guests know also that John's introduction to NFB Newsline and also to the National Federation of the Blind, we are having our national convention this year in New Orleans, and that is going to be in July the 5th through the 10th. You can go to nfbnewsline.org and find more about our convention. Also, you may want to see if you qualify for a national scholarship. There's quite a bit of funds there in the scholarship this year, and I'm sure that you would want to find out if you qualify. And we'll be right back with our guest, Mr. John Pare, and stay tuned.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I am a CFP practitioner, and I happen to be blind. I rely on NFB Newsline to keep me current with Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times.
Hoosiers can hear Indiana magazines, circulars, national magazines, and information from across the globe. Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Welcome back to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana. And again, today's guest is Mr. John Pare, who is Executive Director in our national office. And Mr. Pare, thank you again for being our guest.
Absolutely. Thrilled to be here.
Mr. Pare, Now, today we would love to talk about Social Security benefits. A lot of people aren't aware of a lot of how it works, and a lot of people aren't familiar with, how it pertains to people coping with disabilities. So let's talk a little bit about Social Security, SSI and SSDI, if you might.
Absolutely. All right. So how about I'll give a quick review a little bit about the difference from the two of them. So let's start with Social Security Disability Income, SSDI. SSDI is intended for to be insurance for people who are working. You're paying into really two things as you're working when you have the taxes deducted for your Social Security taxes, one for retirement and the other in the event that you have to go on disability. There's some specific rules for blindness that are very advantageous. So they might think of what would happen if I suddenly was working and became blind, or even if I was working and due to my blindness felt that I could no longer work, would I be eligible? Well, here's the eligibility criteria for SSDI. One, you have to be statutory blindness. That's something we hear about all the time. That means that your best corrected vision is 2200 or worse, or your field of vision is 20 degrees or less, and you'd be considered statutorily blind. That's the first criteria. Next, it has to be expected to last at least 12 months. That's almost always the case. So that is easily accomplished for most people. If you are blind, you probably are going to stay that way. That would be my case. I have cone rod retina degeneration. It just gets worse, and my vision is worse than statutory blindness. So I would pass both of those criteria. You have to have enough quarters of coverage. So that means you have to have paid into the system enough money. I'm not going to go through all the details of quarters of coverage, but we could deal with you at that on an individual basis, because it depends on exactly when you worked and exactly when you had the onset of blindness. Then the last is only 4 criteria, so that's 3. So the 4th criteria is if you are working, that you're making less than $2,260 a month. I mean, if you're not working at all, you're not making any, then you're eligible. If you are making $1,000 a month, you're eligible. You can be eligible right up to $2,260 a month. If you make $1 more, you're not eligible that month. We refer to that as the earnings cliff. The National Federation of Blind is urging Congress to change that rule so it has a phase out, but right now it has the cliff. So those are the 4 criteria, the 4 basic criteria to receive SSDI. Now, for the other program is referred to as the Supplemental Security Income, SSI. SSI has many of the same criteria. First, it has to be statutory blindness with the exact same definition. It doesn't actually have the 12-month rule. So it's just really, number 1, statutory blindness. Number 2, and this is intended for people who probably have not worked, or if they did work, they were unable to save up very much money, because your savings in this case has to be less than $2,000. So this is the money you have primarily, say, in your checking account or your savings account and so forth. So you have to have very little savings. All right. And then last, you have to have very little earnings. So this is for people with very little resources and earnings to help them get by. And this one does have, SSI does have more of a phase out, at least when it comes to earnings. There's a 2-for-1 phase out. So as you make money, you would lose for every $2 you make, you lose $1 of benefits. The benefit level for the SSI program is $841. That's as of just started here in 2022. Everyone on the SSI program receives the same benefit. Going back, maybe I should have mentioned back on the SSDI program, your benefit level is based on how much money you've put into the system up to that point. So everyone's benefit can be a little bit different. The average benefit is about $1,200 a month. This is for the SSDI program, but everybody's different. For the SSI program, everybody's the same, which is currently at $841. I think that would be the quick summary. And there's, of course, more information available on the Social Security website, or you can learn more by contacting the National Federation of the Blind.
Okay. Yeah, John, I know that the National Federation of the Blind is the oldest and of the organized blind community in America. And one of the statistics from the National Federation of the Blind on SSDI is that there's 1.3 million people that receive SSDI, and also that the Social Security Administration is saying that there's 9.7 million Americans receive benefits from the SSDI program. And years ago, the National Federation of the Blind done some legislation on Social Security. I often hear people ask the question, well, why is it that the blind receive X amount of dollars and others don't? Could you expound on that a little bit for me?
Sure. Well, certainly the National Federation of Blind has advocated for blind people. We have done, to be frank, we've done a pretty good job advocating for blind people and doing certain things to make sure that people are eligible for both SSI and SSDI. Especially, we've made progress with the SSDI program. When it comes to blindness, the key difference from other disabilities is the idea that you're determined, your disability is based on your statutory blindness, not so much on this concept of substantial gainful employment. So if you're blind and you're making less than the thresholds that I described, then you're eligible for the benefit. This is with SSDI. And so I think that is something that we've done. And a lot of times it allows people to get a footing, to make sure they have money to live, and then also to potentially return to work. So much of what we at the National Federation of the Blind do is make sure that people know about, for example, our training centers, our model training centers. They can help make sure that people get the skills they need to return to work, to get the confidence and the ability to return to work. And that's a lot of our combined efforts, is to make sure that people have enough of the benefit to put food on the table and a place to live, but also be able to stress the possibility of going to work.
Now, what I'm finding through statistics, once again, and you can help validate this for me, John, is there 75% of the people receiving Social Security are, let's see, 75% are 50 and over, and then 35% are 60 and over. Now, do you, from your viewpoint and your lens of things, do you see that increasing as the baby boom generation continues to live longer, and by the numbers in the population itself, the impact that you would see on Social Security? Are you seeing anything there that we should be aware of?
Well, you're absolutely correct that the as a general rule, to corroborate your statistics, about half of blind people are older Americans. It depends a little bit about where you draw that threshold, and I'm only say approximately half. But so many of the cause of blindness is age-related, from glaucoma to age-related macular degeneration to some of the effects of diabetes, tend to be more acute as you get older. And as the population as a whole lives longer and is in that older characteristic, like the baby boomers, it's inevitable that the number of people, blind people, will be skewed towards older Americans. So that's a combination of the demographic changes and the cause of blindness being frequently age-related. Not all of them, but many of them.
Okay. Well, John, we're going to take us a short pause for the calls here and come back with the conclusion of our show. And we want to thank once again our guest, Mr. John Pare. Stay tuned.
Thousands of Indiana residents feel isolated from the world due to vision problems. Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm blind. I read Stars and Stripes on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline.
Welcome back to the conclusion of our show. And Mr. John Pare, is there anything that you would like to leave for our listening and viewing audience today, sir?
Florence and Lee, it's been an honor for me to be on this show and to talk about NFB Newsline. You guys are doing fantastic work. I really hope to see the listeners at our national convention. And until then, have a great day.
All right. So once again, we want to thank our listening and viewing audience for joining us on the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show. We welcome you back next week as we have another fantastic guest on the NFB Newsline Indiana. Take care of yourselves and God bless.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.